John leaned back in his chair, watching the soft flicker of candlelight dance across the elegant table. His wife, Catherine, sat across from him, looking as poised and beautiful as ever. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and the faint glow of the candlelight reflected off her flawless skin. It was a typical Thursday night. Dinner at home, wine in crystal glasses, and easy conversation about work and weekend plans. Everything was just as it should be, or so he thought. John's life felt like a well-oiled machine. A stable job, a beautiful house, and a marriage that had been the envy of many. He and Catherine had been married for 8 years, and although their relationship lacked the fiery passion of its early days, John was content. Stability, he told himself, was better than the unpredictability of new love. He had no reason to doubt their bond, no reason to believe anything was wrong. Still, lately, there had been moments, fleeting and subtle, where Catherine seemed distant. Nothing dramatic, just small, almost imperceptible shifts. A distracted look during their conversations or a quick excuse to end a phone call. But John, ever the optimist, chalked it up to the pressures of work. She had been swamped with new projects, often working late hours, so her occasional aloofness didn't alarm him. Yet tonight, something felt different. As they finished dinner and she cleared the plates, John noticed her phone buzz on the counter. Catherine glanced at it quickly, her face tightening for the briefest second. She swiped the screen and turned the phone over, placing it face down on the counter. It wasn't the first time he had seen her do that. A knot began to form in his stomach. "You seem quiet tonight," John said, trying to keep his tone light. Catherine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired," she replied softly, her voice distant as she moved to the sink to wash the dishes. John nodded, but something inside him stirred. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, though he had no solid reason to believe it. He trusted Catherine implicitly. They had been through too much together for him to doubt her now. Still, that uneasy feeling lingered as the evening went on. Later, after Catherine had gone to bed, John stayed up, replaying the night in his mind. The small, subtle shifts in her behavior that he had brushed off for weeks suddenly seemed more pronounced. The way she had turned her phone over, the quick, unreadable look in her eyes. For the first time, a sliver of doubt began to creep into John's mind. Could there be something more to her recent behavior? He shook his head, pushing the thought aside. There was no way. But the doubt lingered, just under the surface, quietly whispering that maybe, just maybe, everything wasn't as perfect as it seemed. The following days passed in a blur, but John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Catherine's behavior didn't help either. She continued to be distant, more preoccupied than ever. She often worked late or spent long hours away from home under the pretense of meetings. But it wasn't until one evening when John noticed her texting late into the night that the knot in his stomach tightened. John had never been the jealous type. He valued trust in their relationship, so he didn't question her comings and goings. But tonight was different. His instincts, which he had ignored for weeks, were now screaming at him. Something wasn't right. When Catherine went to the bathroom, leaving her phone on the coffee table, John found himself staring at it. He didn't want to invade her privacy, but the doubt had become unbearable. He had to know if the uneasy feeling gnawing at him had any merit. Slowly, he picked up the phone. At first, everything seemed normal. Work emails, group messages. But then he saw a string of texts from a contact saved under a name he didn't recognize. Alex. The messages were brief, yet oddly personal. His heart pounded as he scrolled up. The conversation stretched back weeks, filled with late-night exchanges and affectionate words. John felt a cold wave wash over him as he realized the truth. This wasn't just a colleague or a casual acquaintance. Catherine had been hiding something, someone, from him. His hands trembled as he put the phone down, his mind racing. His chest tightened as the world around him seemed to tilt. He had been so blind, so trusting, and now he felt like a fool. Catherine reappeared from the bathroom, unaware of what had just transpired. She smiled faintly at him before grabbing her phone from the table. That smile, once warm and reassuring, now felt hollow, like a mask she wore to hide her secrets. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice casual, as though the ground beneath John hadn't just shattered. John swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Yeah, fine," he muttered, though his voice sounded foreign to his own ears. For the rest of the evening, John's mind spiraled. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, deep and raw. He had loved her, trusted her, and now everything seemed tainted by the revelation of her deceit. Every touch, every word they had shared over the last few months felt like a lie. How could he not have seen it? How long had this been going on? The next morning, John woke up with a heavy heart, unable to keep pretending. The sight of Catherine moving around the kitchen, preparing breakfast as though nothing had changed, made his stomach churn. He knew he couldn't let this fester any longer. The time for confronting her had come. "Catherine," he said, his voice steady but cold. She looked up from her coffee, sensing the shift in his tone. "We need to talk." There was a brief flash of panic in her eyes before she masked it with a neutral expression. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trying to remain calm, but there was a slight tremble that gave her away. John didn't hesitate. "Who is Alex?" Her face paled. For a moment, the kitchen fell silent, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Catherine stared at him, her expression a mixture of guilt and shock. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, knowing that any attempt to deny the truth would be futile. I can explain," she stammered, but John raised his hand to stop her. "I've already seen the messages," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Don't insult me by pretending this isn't what it looks like." Catherine lowered her gaze, tears welling in her eyes. She took a deep breath, the weight of her deception sinking into the room. "I didn't want to hurt you, John," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But it's true. I've been seeing someone else." John stood there, frozen, the words sinking in like a knife to the chest. The betrayal felt complete now, each syllable of her confession cutting deeper than the last. He turned away, unable to look at her anymore. "I trusted you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I gave you everything." "I know," Catherine replied, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, John. I never meant for it to get this far." But it had. And there was no undoing what had been done. John sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. The weight of Catherine's confession bore down on him like a crushing force. The woman he had shared his life with, built a future with, had betrayed him in the most intimate way. He felt hollow, as if someone had stripped away everything that made him whole. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the faint sounds of Catherine moving in the other room, likely gathering her things. He couldn't bring himself to look at her. He had nothing left to say. The woman he thought he knew had become a stranger overnight. His thoughts swirled in a chaotic storm of emotions. Rage, sorrow, disbelief. How could she do this to him? How had he not seen it coming? Over the next few days, John slipped into a state of emotional numbness. He went through the motions, work, eating, sleeping, but felt as though he were watching someone else live his life. Friends and colleagues noticed the change in him, but he brushed off their concerns with the same hollow phrases. "I'm fine, just tired." But he wasn't fine. Far from it. At night, the loneliness was unbearable. His once warm and comfortable home now felt cold and empty. The bed, now too large, became a reminder of what he had lost. Every room in the house seemed to echo with memories of his life with Catherine, memories now tainted by the sting of betrayal. He tried to push it all away, to bury the hurt deep down where it couldn't touch him. But it was always there, bubbling just beneath the surface, threatening to pull him under. He would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, mind racing with thoughts of her, of them. The idea of her with someone else made his stomach twist in knots. John realized he couldn't stay in this place, this emotional purgatory. The life he once knew was gone, shattered beyond repair. He needed to move forward, to find a way out of the suffocating darkness that had taken over his heart. But how? It was on a particularly bleak Saturday morning when a thought crossed his mind. Hannah. His childhood best friend, the one person who had always been a constant in his life, even if they had drifted apart over the years. He hadn't seen or spoken to her in what felt like ages, but the memory of her kindness and unwavering support during difficult times flashed through his mind. Maybe reconnecting with her would help him find some semblance of clarity, or at the very least, a distraction from the chaos swirling inside him. Without giving it much thought, John picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. To his surprise, her number was still there. After a moment of hesitation, he tapped her name, a flicker of hope rising within him as the phone began to ring. John sat nervously at a small cafe table, fidgeting with his coffee cup. It had been years since he last saw Hannah, yet when she picked up his call, her voice was warm, familiar, and full of the same lightheartedness he remembered. She had agreed to meet him without hesitation, as though no time had passed at all. The doorbell chimed, and John looked up to see her walk in. Hannah was every bit as striking as he remembered. Tall, with deep brown eyes and long, flowing hair that framed her face in soft waves, she exuded a quiet confidence. But what struck him most was her smile. Genuine, easy, the kind that made you feel like everything would be okay. "John," she said brightly as she approached, arms open for a hug. "It's been way too long." As they embraced, John felt a flood of emotions rise within him: comfort, relief, and an overwhelming sense of nostalgia. It was as if the years of distance melted away in that moment. Hannah had always had that effect on him, grounding him when life felt chaotic. "Too long indeed," he said, his voice betraying the weariness he had been carrying for weeks. They sat down, and for a few moments, neither spoke. It wasn't awkward, just the quiet kind of reunion where no words were needed. "So," Hannah said, her eyes softening as she looked at him, "what's going on? You sounded different on the phone." John sighed, taking a deep breath as he searched for the right words. He hadn't talked to anyone about what had happened with Catherine. He wasn't even sure how to begin. But something about Hannah made him feel safe, like he could finally let the weight of his pain go, if only for a little while. "I'm going through a rough time," he began, his voice low. "Catherine and I, it's over. He paused, the words catching in his throat. Hannah didn't push. She simply waited, her gaze steady and patient. She was living a double life. "I found out she's been seeing someone else for months." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, the cafe seemed to quiet around them. John felt exposed, vulnerable, admitting the truth aloud for the first time. Hannah reached across the table and took his hand, her grip firm but gentle. "John, I'm so sorry," she said softly. Her eyes were filled with empathy, not pity, and that made all the difference. "I can't imagine how hard this must be for you." For the first time in weeks, John felt the sharp edge of his pain soften, just a little. He didn't realize how much he had needed this, someone to listen, to care, without judgment. He squeezed her hand, grateful for her presence. "Thanks, Hannah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's been difficult. I don't even know where to start rebuilding my life." Hannah smiled, her expression full of understanding. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now, one step at a time. And you know what? You don't have to go through it alone." They spent the next couple of hours talking, reminiscing about their childhood, the adventures they had shared, and the years they had lost touch. John felt a sense of normalcy begin to return as they laughed over old memories. It was as if Hannah had reignited a small spark of hope in him, reminding him of the parts of himself he had forgotten. As they prepared to leave, Hannah stopped and looked at him seriously. "I'm here for you, John. Whenever you need someone to talk to, or if you just need a distraction, I'm only a phone call away." John smiled, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. "I might take you up on that." As they said their goodbyes and John watched her walk away, he realized something unexpected. For the first time since his world had crumbled, he didn't feel entirely alone. And, somewhere deep inside, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't dared to believe in yet: hope. Over the next few weeks, John and Hannah began spending more time together. It wasn't planned or deliberate. It just seemed to happen naturally. What started as occasional coffee meetups turned into long walks through the park, dinners, and late-night conversations. John found himself looking forward to these moments, not just because they were a distraction from the pain, but because Hannah brought out something in him he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging. Their friendship, once lost to the years, now felt more vibrant than ever. Hannah had an infectious energy that made him laugh, even on the darkest days. She was witty, quick to smile, and unafraid to challenge him, in the gentle way only a longtime friend could. John often caught himself lost in thought, replaying their conversations and the ease with which they fell back into each other's lives. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, John found himself at Hannah's door, barely thinking about the fact that he hadn't called ahead. It had become second nature to seek her out when life felt overwhelming. She opened the door, surprised but happy to see him, and invited him in without hesitation. They spent the evening on her couch, sipping wine and talking about everything and nothing at the same time. Hannah, with her head resting on the armrest, asked him about his plans for the future. "I don't know," John admitted, his voice softer than usual. "I haven't really thought much past getting through each day. Everything still feels uncertain." Hannah looked at him for a long moment, her expression serious yet full of warmth. "You've been through so much, John. It's okay not to have all the answers right now, but when you do figure it out, just know that you have someone in your corner." John felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, the quiet certainty in her voice. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that, how much he needed someone to believe in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. As the night wore on, their conversation turned playful again. They started recounting stories from their youth, moments that made them both laugh until their sides ached. But through the laughter, John noticed something else. There was a new closeness between them, an unspoken connection that went beyond friendship. At one point, their eyes met, and the laughter faded into a comfortable silence. John felt his heart skip a beat, unsure of what this moment meant. He had never considered the possibility of anything beyond friendship with Hannah. She had always been a part of his life, but now things felt different. There was a softness in the way she looked at him, a warmth that stirred something deep inside. But as quickly as the moment had come, John pulled back, his mind immediately flashing to Catherine and the scars she had left behind. Could he really allow himself to feel something again, so soon after the pain of betrayal? Was he even capable of trusting his heart with someone else? Hannah seemed to sense his hesitation, offering him a reassuring smile, as if to say she understood without needing words. She didn't push, didn't pry, she just let the moment be, allowing him the space to process what he was feeling. As he left her apartment that night, John's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. He knew that whatever he was feeling for Hannah was more than just gratitude for her support. There was something real there, something he hadn't expected. But the fear of being hurt again loomed large, casting a shadow over the possibility of what might come next. Still, as he walked home, a quiet hope began to grow within him, pushing aside the lingering doubts. Maybe, just maybe, love wasn't entirely out of reach. And perhaps, in Hannah, he had found someone who could help him believe in it again. The following days were filled with quiet introspection for John. His mind kept drifting back to the night at Hannah's apartment. The warmth of her smile, the way she made him feel at ease, and the unspoken connection that had lingered in the air between them. He knew, deep down, that his feelings for her had grown beyond friendship. But every time he allowed himself to dwell on it, a wave of fear would crash over him. The pain of Catherine's betrayal was still fresh, the scars not yet fully healed. Could he really open his heart again? Could he trust someone so soon after it had been shattered? Despite his doubts, John couldn't shake the thought of Hannah. She had become a light in his life during his darkest time, and the more time he spent with her, the more he realized just how much she meant to him. He had to tell her. He couldn't keep pretending that what he felt was simply platonic. One evening, after wrestling with his thoughts for days, John decided he needed to be honest with himself, and with her. He invited Hannah over for dinner, his nerves frayed as he prepared for what he was about to say. They had always been open with each other, but this conversation felt like a leap into the unknown. As they sat across from each other at the dinner table, the usual light-hearted conversation flowed, but John's mind was elsewhere. He kept glancing at her, trying to muster the courage to speak. Finally, as they were finishing their meal, he put down his fork, taking a deep breath. "Hannah," he started, his voice hesitant, "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, her eyes full of warmth and curiosity. "What is it, John?" For a moment, he hesitated, fear creeping in. But then he remembered all the times she had been there for him, how patient and understanding she had been. He couldn't keep this from her any longer. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said slowly, "about us and what we've been through together these past few weeks. You've been an incredible friend, Hannah, but I think my feelings for you have changed." Hannah blinked, her expression softening as she waited for him to continue. "I know this might seem sudden," he went on, his voice faltering slightly, "but I can't deny that I feel something more than just friendship between us. You've helped me through so much and I don't know how to explain it, but I think I'm falling for you." The words hung in the air, and John's heart pounded in his chest as he watched her reaction. For a moment, there was silence, but then Hannah smiled, a soft, understanding smile that made his anxiety melt away. "John," she said gently, reaching out to take his hand, "I've always cared about you. And over these past few weeks, I've felt the same. But I didn't want to push you, knowing everything you've been through." Relief washed over him like a wave, and in that moment, the fear that had held him back began to fade. The connection between them, built on trust and shared history, was real. And for the first time in a long time, John felt like he could trust his heart again. They sat together, hands intertwined, knowing that this was the beginning of something new, something honest and full of hope. The days that followed their confession felt like a dream, yet for the first time in months, John's life felt real, solid, grounded. He and Hannah fell into a rhythm that was effortless, natural. The awkwardness he had feared never came. Instead, their relationship deepened, evolving from the safety of friendship into something far more meaningful. John hadn't expected to feel this way again so soon. After the devastation of his marriage, he had assumed love was something out of reach, something he wasn't ready for. But with Hannah, it felt different. Their connection wasn't built on passion alone, but on trust, history, and a deep understanding of one another. She knew his scars, she had seen him at his worst, and she accepted him fully. They spent their days much like before, dinners, long walks, and shared laughter, but there was a new intimacy now, a closeness that made everything feel more vibrant. Every touch, every glance between them carried a deeper meaning. John found himself looking at her in quiet moments, marveling at how lucky he was to have found her again. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments of doubt, times when John's old fears resurfaced. He worried about trusting too much, about giving his heart so fully after it had been broken. And yet, whenever those fears crept in, Hannah was there, patient, steady, and always understanding. She never rushed him, never pushed for more than he was ready to give. She simply loved him in the way she knew how, quietly, consistently, and without expectations. One afternoon, as they strolled through the park, John stopped and turned to her, feeling a surge of gratitude. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow around them, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. "Hannah," he said, his voice soft but filled with emotion, "I don't know what I would have done without you these past few months." She smiled up at him, her eyes filled with the same warmth that had always comforted him. "You don't have to thank me, John. We've always been there for each other. That's what we do." John took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I don't just mean for being there, I mean for everything. For helping me believe in love again, in people, in myself." Hannah's smile grew wider, and she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You've always had that in you, John. You just needed to see it again." They stood there, in the quiet of the park, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the world around them bathed in a soft amber light. John realized, in that moment, that he had truly found peace. The wounds from Catherine's betrayal hadn't disappeared, but they no longer defined him. With Hannah by his side, he felt ready to face whatever the future held. Together. As they walked back home, hand in hand, John knew that whatever challenges came their way, they would face them as partners. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to believe in happiness again. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment. Your suggestions and ideas for new stories are very welcome. It helps us create even more content that you'll love. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates.